To me, Global Reach Out is inspiring.
It's connecting with God, reaching out to the world, and impacting life.
The stories that shared is so personal and it deeply impacted me.
Global Reach Out to me is reach out to the truth.
Connecting hearts, connecting lives. You're listening to Global Reach Out.
In this episode, I want to continue with this idea about shepherd leader's task. In my previous episode, I've mentioned the three leadership roles for a biblical leader is servant, shepherd, and steward. We have covered shepherd, we have covered servant. Today, I will continue with the shepherd leader's task and thereafter lead us into the final metaphor, that is, the leader is a steward of God's resources. But for now, let's continue with the shepherd leader's task. A shepherd leader connects with the flock, and therefore the relational web will always be a distinguishing characteristic for churches and Christian organizations. We call this fellowship. Many leaders commit the error of separating leadership from relationship. This happens when a person steps into a position of leadership and assumes that everyone will follow him because of his position. Other leaders wrongly believe that their knowledge alone qualifies them to lead. Leaders must be able to relate with the flock they lead. Effective leadership is grounded in relationships. And the Bible has numerous instructions on relationships that every leader should heed and need. So, a shepherd's leader's task. Not every biblical leader is a model of relational health, but we see the examples of Joseph forgiving his brothers for their treachery, David caring for his men while fleeing from Saul, and Paul mentoring young Timothy. So while not every biblical leader is a model of relational health and goodness, we see examples: Joseph, David, and Paul. The New Testament has numerous exhortations on how people should relate. Do unto others in humility, consider others better than yourself, and speak the truth in love. If a leader exerts force on the flock, they will follow. Yes, but out of fear. A shepherd leader's authority rests upon a profound trust among his flock accorded to him. Examples of shepherd leaders in the Bible. Scripture earnestly stresses the serious responsibility of human leaders for those who follow them. It's a heavy responsibility, leadership. One of the most solemn chapters in the Old Testament is the denunciation of the faithless shepherds in Ezekiel 34. God shepherded his people through Moses, the human leader he appointed to shepherd them. This pattern continues in the reign of David and his dynasty. The Lord took David from shepherding sheep and made him shepherd of Israel in 2 Samuel chapter 5. So the imagery of a shepherd and his flock thus provided a picture of the way God cared for his people and also served as a model for biblical leaders. God cares for his people as a shepherd cares for his flock. Leaders are likewise to rule over people as a shepherd tends the flock. That is a shepherd. The final metaphor I want to talk about is the leader. Beside being a servant, beside being a shepherd, a leader is a steward. Steward of resources. More accurately, steward of God's resources. A steward leader is acutely aware of his identity as a steward, or as a steward, as a manager, not the owner of the resources. While every Christian is a steward who is responsible to manage whatever gifts and resources God has given in order to serve others, God assigns a steward leader and gives him the responsibility of overseeing resources that may include people, budget, time, wisdom, and talents. This responsibility includes other Christians who cooperate with him, Titus 1:7. And so, a steward leader do not own the resources, but he steward the resources that belongs to God. Word study for steward. In the Old Testament, a steward is a man who is over the house, Genesis 43 and Isaiah 22. In the New Testament, two Greek words are translated steward. Epitropos in Matthew 20, which designate one to take care or to be entrusted with responsibility, a curator, a guardian, right? For example. The other word is oikonomos in Luke 16 and 1 Corinthians 4, depicting a manager or superintendent. Oikonomos comes from the two words, oikos meaning house and nemo meaning to manage or to dispense. The word is used to describe the function of a delegated responsibilities. So as a steward leader, the responsibility that we have is a delegated responsibility from the Lord, from God himself. It's not something that we usurp for ourselves. It's a delegated responsibility from above. When Jesus taught a parable on stewardship in Luke chapter 12, he reminded his servants always to be ready for service and to keep the lamps burning until his return. Peter, on hearing Jesus' teaching, sought to clarify whether Jesus' teaching was meant for everyone, and Jesus' answer was that the parable was for the faithful and wise stewards that he placed in charge of his servants. Thus, the oikonomos role was to see that other servants are equipped as well, nourished and fulfilling their God-given task in their master's house when he returned. That is the idea of a steward leader, as opposed to a steward. Jesus underscored that the qualities needed in steward leadership are faithfulness and wisdom. The essential qualities for a steward of God: a steward of God must first have the propensity to prayer and planning, as seen in the example of Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 1. Spending time in prayer produces concern, sanctify our mind, provide creative plans, as well as assurance of God-given convictions. Planning is bridging the gap between the way things are and the things God wants them to be. And so planning involves facts, goals, resources, timetables, movements, communication, and most important, conviction of faith. Second, a steward of God is motivating and mobilizing. Again, taking Nehemiah as an example, in Nehemiah chapter 2, motivation precedes mobilization. The key to motivating begins with discovering the felt needs of the people. This effort allows a leader to totally identify with the people, plan a simple workable solution, and as well as establish that God and circumstances are for the people, that God is behind what is happening. The key to mobilizing includes enthusiastically communicating one's faith, meeting their desires and needs, actively involving in the task, and maintaining and managing the initiatives. The third essential quality for a steward of God is the propensity in organizing and delegating, that first begins with gathering facts and analysis of the situation, followed by a carefully thought out division of the task. You see this in Nehemiah chapter 3 to 6, a division of the task into workable units. Finally, the process will culminate in evaluation. So we talk about the essential qualities for a steward of God. I want to now talk about the task for a steward leader of God. A steward leader's task is to channel God's resources, use God's resources. He oversees the relational process of helping people discern gifts and serve within the community of faith, within the church. Steward leaders will also approach finances with a great sense of humility and seek God's guidance to use the resources that align with the strategy to advance the gospel, knowing full well that every Christian is a steward who has the responsibility to manage and channel the resources God has given him in order to serve others for the advancement of the gospel. Every Christian is a steward, but not every Christian is a steward leader. A steward leader is mindful how to channel all of God's resources from all the stewards of God. That is a steward leader. In the parable in Matthew 25, verse 15, the man who was given 5 talents felt the weight of responsibility. 1 talent is equivalent to 20 years of money, of income. So the one who was given 5 talents felt the weight and responsibility and the opportunity as well to earn a return commensurate to what he has received than those who have been given less. So God gave 1 talent, 2 talents, and 5 talents. So the man who was given 5 talents felt the weight and responsibility as well as opportunity. Now, the gifts mix of our congregation includes experiences and expertise, which oblige a leader to grapple with the issue whether to ignore or to harness these resources. It could be 1, could be 2, could be 5 talents. Using the gifts that God has bestowed upon the congregation is good stewardship. And so is using resources with an eye toward the future. It is a great challenge to allocate the God-given resources of people, of money, of energy, individually from each member of the congregation, as well as corporately from the church or the Christian community as a whole, in accordance to God's leading into the future. Good stewardship requires intentional thinking as well as doing, which means leading and planning for the future of the church. To accomplish God's mission, churches need to leverage the combined talents of a diversity of gifts within their congregation. Examples of steward leaders in the Bible. The Bible names several people as steward leaders, not merely steward leaders. They include Adam in Genesis 2, the Israelites in Leviticus 25 and Deuteronomy chapter 8, Joseph in Genesis 39, Aholiab, Exodus 31, Bezalel, Exodus 35. The Levitical priest, the 7 men appointed to serve the Hellenistic widows. Remember Acts chapter 6, the 7 men appointed to serve the Hellenistic widows. And Timothy also is mentioned as a steward leader. So the 3-faceted model that I have described in the previous episode and culminate with today is servant, shepherd, and steward. All 3 models or metaphors are rooted in the Old and the New Testament. God calls and equips an individual or a group of people to lead relative to the rest of the created order. So God calls either an individual or perhaps a group of individuals, a group of people to lead the rest of the created order. Specifically in a church setting, in a Christian community setting, this model of leading involves some people leading others in order to accomplish God's purpose, not man's purpose. A few general observations about leadership in the Bible. Leadership begins with God calling a person to the role and to the task. A leader does not appoint or choose himself. God is the one who chooses and appoints. God chooses leaders using an entirely different set of criteria than people do. Leadership is a process of God's preparation. It does not happen overnight. Leadership in Scripture is about influence, not your rank, not your title, not your position. Leadership is closely linked to purpose, to the why, what, and how. As a leader follows after God, he or she in turn leads the followers to God. A leader obeys God, is willing to suffer, to sacrifice, has the boldness to do what requires, and the courage to do it. A leader seeks after God's approval, not man's approval. A leader relies on God, not on himself or herself, to carry out the heavy task of leadership. A leader is faithful in his human efforts, yet trusts God for the outcome. A leader is characterized by a passion for God and a compassion for people. And finally, a leader is selfless, humbly and steadfastly discharging his responsibility or her responsibility without any concern on the time and the toll that it takes on one's health. So in concluding today's episode, I want to ask 3 reflective questions to consider. Number one, what comes to mind when the word steward is being mentioned? What comes to mind when we mention the word steward? 2, what is your takeaway lesson from the study of the word steward? And 3, which of the stewards mentioned in the Bible impresses you? Thank you and stay tuned.
The program is proudly presented by Global Reach Out. We welcome you to share our live enriching webcasts with family and friends through our website, global-reachout.org. Let's reach out to bless more lives together.